Hello, I'm Claire Poole and welcome to the Climate of Sport podcast, the show in which you get the inside track on all things sport and sustainability globally. Join me every week where I'll be chatting to a special guest about news, opinion and insights on how sport is moving to a more environmentally friendly future or taking action on climate change. Hi everyone and welcome to this episode of the Climate of Sport podcast with me, Claire Poole, and delighted today to be joined by Tom Gribbin, co-founder of Planet Super League. Tom, it's lovely to finally get you on the podcast. We've been chatting about this for a while.
We have, Claire. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. It's such a pleasure. So to start things off, I think a lot of people who listen to our podcast or in this space have probably heard of Planet Super League. You've had some unbelievably well received campaigns over the past 12, 18 months. But just for anyone who isn't familiar with you and your organisation, can you tell us a little bit? First of all, let's start with you, your background in terms of getting to where you are with Planet Super League, and then we want to hear a little bit about the organisation as well.
Okay, I've had quite a varied career, really, and you could sort of draw a line and connect the dots together, which I think has helped with where we got to with Planet Super League. I started in a marketing role, selling and marketing chocolate bars. I've worked in the advertising industry, making TV ads for big brands. And then in my mid-20s, I randomly joined a climate change charity. And my first meeting was at Downing Street with these huge brands. And I had such imposter syndrome, because
it's not a bad start.
It wasn't a bad start. I didn't really know what I was doing, but we launched this wonderful campaign working with some big brands on helping their shoppers and customers live greener. It was called Together, and we ran that for a few years, and then the financial crash happened, but learned an awful lot about this space of climate change, and particularly consumers, us and our behaviour and our role in this. I then founded or co-founded a company called Behavior Change, and very much stayed in that space for a while. So looking at things like, how do we get people to insulate their homes? How do we encourage people to take the bus and not drive their car? So some really challenging areas around people's lives and the ways you might influence them or persuade them or excite them to do something a bit different. I then did an MBA for a year, which was fun, being a student again, living in student digs, taking my washing home at the weekend and seeing my wife, and then going to be a student again. And came out of that, and I worked a lot in the digital innovation space. So looking at, it was actually in the healthcare space, and looking at, ideation around new propositions around kind of putting something to market and testing and iterating it, and that whole sort of lean startup methodology. I then had my first startup, which was around getting kids more physically active, which was really great, but the commercial model was quite challenging. And I also joined the board at Nottingham Forest. I'm a big Forest fan, and I was on the board of their community trust for 5 years. And so I'd had all this experience, and I really was looking for the next thing, and I met this guy called James Atkins. And so that was the background. And I met James, and he said to me through an introduction, I think we could use football to help fight climate change. And I was intrigued by that. And I thought, what's this guy talking about? So we met up a few times, and what James's idea was, football, I think half of the world's population watch the last World Cup.
Yeah.
It's a religion to many people. It's part of the fabric of society, whether you're a football fan or not. And there's a huge passion and a huge competitiveness and huge fun and entertainment for it. And we actually need levers like that. If we're going to get people, there's policy and technology and all the big net zero things that go on. But when we talk about ordinary people, we need we need those amazing levers and things to tap into if we are going to, as people, make those changes, because we don't want them imposed on us. That rarely works, and we've got to find ways to fit it into society and make it normal. And so we thought, yeah, it sounds a bit strange, football and sustainability and getting people to do stuff. But I think over time, we're starting to prove out that it is quite an exciting space. It's very, very early. Yeah. We've learned so much, and we don't stop learning and doing. We're all about doing stuff and trying things out. But we are right at the beginning of the journey. And I think that's really exciting in this space. But at the same time, you're constantly looking at, the partners that you need to work with, where society is. Mm-hmm. Football's used for all sorts of very other important social issues. Football has other challenges and issues that it's looking at itself. And by the way, just as a quick segue, we started in football, but we certainly believe this concept could work in other particular team sports. So we've started it in the UK in football, mainly because I live here and the team's here. But we certainly think it's a thing that could work in multiple sports.
Definitely. So tell us what the concept of Planet Super League is.
Yes. So as I said earlier, trying to get people to have some meat-free meals or line dry their clothes or insulate their home. There's lots of different behaviors around, energy, food, travel, waste, and, ways we live our daily lives. Yeah. And what we wanted was a mechanism, more than a campaign, but a space where we could put those on the radar of people in interesting ways. So our interesting way is, I'll give you a little example. So let's imagine that you're an Arsenal fan and I'm a Tottenham fan. And in Planet Super League, Arsenal are 10-8 up in our tournament. They're 10-8 up, like a football match, and there's an hour to go. And you get a pop-up on your screen with that score. What you can do if you're a Tottenham fan is you can go onto our platform and you can complete an activity. That could be a meat-free meal, it could be like drying your clothes, and you score a goal by doing it. So the idea is you sign up, there's over 100 activities on the platform, you score goals, 1, 2, 3, or 10 goals if it's one that has a big impact. And the more you do, the more you help your club out. So the idea is that we're tapping into your love for your football club, and we pit them against their rivals and competitors. So we create what we call tournaments, mini tournaments over short periods of time. And so we use football mechanisms, goals scored, we give out yellow cards, and I'll explain that in a minute if people cheat. There's league tables. And so we're using that sort of fun, competitive spirit in a very enjoyable way to try and engage Arsenal fans, Tottenham fans, Liverpool fans, Chesterfield fans. We've got over 60 football clubs in the UK that we're partnering with. And so that mechanism sits on our digital platform. We develop activities across those different four parts of your life. Some of them have a carbon saving attached to them.
Yeah.
Some of them are more about things like getting in touch with nature. We know there's a lot of research out there saying particularly younger people, if they connect with nature at a young age, they're far more likely to care about it and nurture it in the future. So there's things like make a bird feeder out of an old milk carton and decorate it with your club badge, for example. Yeah. So it's perfect for families, for young people, but it also caters for adults and students and just football fans in general.
Amazing. And it's sort of it's at its core, I guess, the concept is tapping into the competitive spirit of football fans, represent their team, do activities that reduce their impact on the environment and get goals in return. And then whoever gets the most goals wins the tournament, I guess. So although simple by nature in terms of that, it's obviously very complex in terms of you set fixture lists, you have all of your online platforms, there's a lot that goes into it. And one of the football sort of references that you didn't mention there was VAR, which is a big part of what you do as well, which I think is really fascinating about Planet Super League in terms of your work, because we see a lot of campaigns and pledges which are incredibly important within this movement as well. But this is one of the very few, if not the only, organisation of this nature which is driving environmentally positive behaviours in citizens that you are verifying, which I think is fascinating in terms of the credibility of that and actually having that concrete data. So tell us a bit about the VAR system, the yellow carding and how that works.
Sure. So for if you're into football, And certainly if you support a Premier League club, you will know what VAR is, and you've probably grown at that terminology. It stands for Video Assistant Referee, and it's used in the Premier League and I think some other leagues to check whether a goal in a match is legitimate, whether there was a foul or an offside. So, and it's been introduced to make the game more fair because referees have to make on-the-spot decisions. So we won't go into that from a football side.
I was going to say, let's not get into a debate about VAR because we have only got probably 45 minutes, Tom.
Exactly. So from our perspective, you're right, Claire. When we from our very first pilot, what I particularly was, it was one of the sort of lines that I didn't really want to move on was in pledging and promising. Across life is really important, and we make promises all the time. We'll go and see our parents more, we'll save for our pension, and we're going to lose weight and exercise twice a week, and we do those things and we try our best to carry those out. But it is difficult. Things crop up and come in the way, and I think when we look at the climate emergency that I hope we all agree that we're in, I didn't believe that we really had time for a lot of pledging and promising. We had to take action. And so in Planet Super League, what we've said is to score your goal for your football club or your school or your employer, you have to have the meat-free meal. And in order to get your goal, you have to upload a photo of that meal. So we on the platform, that's the process you go through. If you're line drying your clothes, if you get a smart meter installed, you've got to take a photo of your smart meter, etc., etc. And what that does is two things. It means that we can check whether you've actually taken action as opposed to just pledged and promised to take action. And we can turn that into a far more tangible metric around impact. So I can say we've had around 100,000 actions taken. That's the equivalent to X tons of CO2 saved. Because it's probably, if you've got a meat-free meal in front of you, it's probably great proof that you're actually going to eat that meal, and we're not going to check your bin, right? So there's a bit of a burden on the user, we call them players, on the fan, because you're asking them to upload a photo. But what we've actually found is it's another great tool to play that user-generated content back to the audience and the community to show that hundreds of thousands of these are happening and people are doing them in their everyday lives. And so it's great content and stories for us to be able to tell. It gives us a tangible data point. And what it does, just to the point of the other reason why we do it, because it's a competition. I'm a huge Forest fan, okay, and I want to beat Derby, and Derby fans really want to beat Forest fans, and so it would be very easy, in theory, to game this mechanic because we have a trophy at the end of it. We present it to the club, that generates some media attention, and so when you're a fan, you're going to. Hopefully, we hope, go all for it to try and win for your club. And we've had over the time that we've been building this, people that have cheated, and it's all fun. Remember, this is all about having some fun and it's all optional, but they really want their club to win so much. They are blatantly uploading Google images. And so and they're submitting the same photo, and so we have a team, an internal team at the moment who check the photos to make sure that they are legitimate, and it varies between sort of, it's about 3% is the sort of baseline of unapproved or VAR offside kind of ruled ones. When you get to a semi-final and a final, that can kick up a little bit higher. So we've got a team. You then get into content moderation. You get into, well, someday this will have to be AI and a machine will have to do it if it proves successful. But what it gives us, I think, some great credibility to go back to the football clubs, to the fans, most importantly, and say, hey, this is what you've contributed to. This is the real impact it's had. So it's an important part, but running the business, it does add, that's a big operational thing to deliver and to hold true to.
Yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot that go into it, and there's loads we can talk about here. So before we go on though, I just want to make a point that you said about the burden on fans to put those photos in and stuff. I don't know if that is a burden, Tom, to be honest, because the amount of people I see photographing their food and posting it on social media. And they're not doing that to be part of a tournament. They just want people to see what they eat, which is amazing to me that you would not eat the food and take a photo first. God bless. But no, that's brilliant in terms of hearing where you're up to and hearing about the sort of concept. So I guess for the purposes of this and thinking about the listeners and the audience and the scope of our work, I think there's two big chunks of stuff I definitely want to hear more from you about and have a chat. The first one is the kind of insights and learnings that you've had, in terms of that fan engagement. I think has popped up on every podcast, and I think it probably will pop up on every podcast we do, because we know from inside the industry that yes, sport as a whole needs to get its own house in order, professional, grassroots, etc. Obviously, to be credible, we have to do the work ourselves first. But the opportunity for sport to drive wide-scale change and drive mass citizens to change behaviours is obviously the biggest opportunity for sport in terms of its reach. So whilst fan engagement comes up a lot and we understand the importance of it and we have different perspectives, I think you've got a great insights to share here in terms of, maybe debunking a few things about, fan engagement around sustainability in football or in sport more generally. So let's I want to hear from you on that. And then the sort of second side as well, that I think will be really interesting to our audience, is that there's quite a few now startup organisations working in very different areas to you, but within sport and climate change, who are starting on this journey of working with sports organisations to drive positive change and are at that sort of startup scale. So I think as well, it'd be fascinating to get some insights for you as we go on about that journey that you've had and the positives and what you've achieved, but also the challenges that you've come across in there. So there, I think, two big things I'd love to hear from you and for us to have a chat about. But let's start about those fan learnings and those insights and what you've learned over, because it's been how many tournaments, 18 months, maybe 5 or 6 tournaments you've done with this now?
Yeah, that's about right. And let's quickly start with that. So one lesson we had, which is not proving out, so we're adapting. Our platform is always on, so you can go to planetsuperleague.com now and sign up and score some goals for your club. And we'd hoped, if you sort of think about behavior change, the theory, you generally need to work with people over a period of time. So there are certain things that might happen in your life, like if you become a parent, then lots of behaviours have to change immediately. If you get very ill or something serious happens, you might stop smoking straight away or drinking, etc. But generally, if you're going to get people into habits, exercising or eating better or saving for their pension, you've got to keep reminding them, nudging them, inspiring them, incentivizing them, whatever. So when we set it up, we thought, well, we'll have this thing always switched on and people will play Planet Super League throughout the year, but they don't. And what we said is we'll run tournaments. So a bit like a Euros tournament or a World Cup, a smaller sort of truncated 5-6 week period where the fixtures will come up and the clubs will be competing against each other, and we'll have gaps between these tournaments, so there'll be a winner and we'll celebrate it and then we'll have a break. So what we found though is the retention between tournament 1 and tournament 2 is really poor at the moment. So you're not getting someone take part in the summer one, and then in the autumn tournament they're still with us. And that's hard, because you're then going, right, we're back to, we've got to start at zero in a way, rather than having a retained user base. But when you think about it from the fans' perspective, and that's what I sort of really try and do all the time, is like just these people's lives. Okay, COVID is one thing. We set up when the pandemic started and our entire team's remote and football had stopped, and so we've lived through that. But when you think of a fan or a family, they've got all sorts of commitments and things going on in their lives, and they're constantly thinking of, well, what's the next thing I want to do? What am I looking forward to? And generally, we have an attention span for something, which is why Movember is for a month and not for 12 months. It's why Red Nose Day, which I think is when we're recording this, is essentially over a weekend. It's not every day of the year, because if it was, it wouldn't cut through. And so what we're learning are, and as this evolves, is we probably can't rely on it. It will always be switched on, but we need to find these moments where we really go for it and we treat it more like a campaign would. So that's one thing that we've learned. And the only way we've learned that, Claire, and I think this is where we're really, one of our principles is we've only learned that by trying and doing stuff and piloting things. So we have got a whole bank of things. I'll give another great example, which sort of goes against probably where some people, and certainly I thought we might be. I won't kind of call out. I will do in certain examples, but I won't call out exactly who. But we worked with one of our football clubs, and we had an England international player, a men's player, put out a video message encouraging their fans to sign up, and that got posted by the club and by us on the social media networks. And if you think of clubs and sponsors and this talent, they're really influential. They've got great reach. It didn't drive sign up. It didn't drive hits to the website. And so you scratch your head and go, well, let's, we could think about why and what we did. What we have found is this. If you think there's a sort of air campaign and a ground campaign, which I'm taking from my colleague Justin Forsyth, who I work with, and the air campaign is important. So we've had some great PR. We've been on the BBC One show, we've been on the BBC World Service and Sky and ITV and all this. It's great. And as a startup, it's really important for us to try and achieve those sorts of things. But again, none of that drives fans to the site to sign up. Seeing it on the news actually doesn't drive people there. What does is having amazing stuff happen within your community at the grassroots level. So a passionate person at the club, or the CCO is the community organization. For those who might not be close to football, there's the football club, and then all of them in the UK, all 92 of them, have a charity which uses the badge of the football club to deliver all of the community work in education, in schools and disability, and all sorts of things. And they're a registered charity, and they use the power of that brand, but they're a separate organization. And we work with a lot of that. We work with a lot of it through that side of the organization. And they're in schools and they're in those community groups. And what you find is one passionate person within that organization. That's where we've unlocked incredible activity, because they've made things happen within the football club, and then that has activated itself in all sorts of different ways. And they're really hard people to find, and learning from them, because, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, there's lots of money in football, but there's not lots of money coming into sustainability in football from a fan side. So this isn't funded. We're not funding these charities to do stuff, and nor do they have a lot of discretionary money to do things like this. So a passionate champion is absolutely gold. I talked about being fair, and our fans, they hate cheating, which is why the VAR thing has kind of moved up to levels where we show the bloopers, actually. So each week we post, we've had people take a photo of a packet of Skittles as their meat-free meal.
That's reaching, isn't it?
Which is great, because it kind of is a meat-free meal, and maybe if you're a student, maybe that is your meal.
I don't think it's as nutritionally dense as perhaps you'd want most of your meals to be.
No,
but
so
still technically meat-free.
So we have to reject the packet of Skittles. But it's funny, there's another activity where you score a goal by having a milk substitute on your cereal. It's called No Moo Milk is the name of the activity. Nice. And one fan uploaded their bowl of cereal, but it was dry. There was no liquid in it. And again, it's really charming, because they've taken the time to take the photo and upload it to score a goal, but it's not really the spirit of what we're wanting. And so we make fun of that. We don't shame them and embarrass them. We don't name them. But it's a really good example of going, actually, people are having some fun. They do want to win. I've got a whole bank of these things. We did some work in a schools program, and there was a family in Wickham that took part, and the young people were actually really into climate change. They'd really been enthused from a young age, but they weren't into football at all.
Yeah.
And they took part in the Schools versus Climate Change tournament, and then we interviewed them at the end of it, and they've become Wycombe Wanderers fans because that was their local club that they signed up and scored goals for. So, the wisdom we've got here is these are football fans. Can we get them to live kind of greener, and can we inspire them to do that? But we've seen these examples of people that are kind of into the planet, but not really into football. So I'm not yet going to clubs saying I'm going to acquire more fans for you. But again, another great, just little example. Cambridge United are the current Planet Super League winners. They won the Cup 26 tournament that we ran in the run-up to COP 26. I hope you've noticed the pun there in the name of the tournament.
Yeah.
And what's again, if you look at the kind of reverse side of this is, unlike football, so in football, the players win the trophy for the club.
Yes.
And the fans. And it's the performance of those 11 players and the substitutes and the squad that dictate the outcome of the result. And that's how football works, and that's how all sports work. In Planet Super League, it's the opposite. It is the fans who have to perform in order to win. And so that's what we're, early in our journey of developing our brand and our proposition is, if you're a fan, actually, it really is in your hands. Forget about the 12th man in the stands, celebrating. If you want to win the Planet Super League trophy for your football club, you can directly, play into that. And that's what Cambridge United and their fan base did. And we presented the trophy to the Cambridge fans on the One show back in November. And then we did it at the stadium. And that sits in the trophy cabinet of the football club, but it's won by the fans. Off the back of that victory, Cambridge then, again, they were relatively smaller club in the lower divisions, and it really opened their eyes to the whole sustainability space, which we know who the leaders are, and it's fantastic. But there are a lot of organizations that are, at day zero on this. And this really put it, this is now a board agenda item for the football club itself, off the back of what the fans have done, which again sort of goes against what a lot of the stories are: work on your scope 1, 2, and 3, and fans are crucial. And yes, we know it's going to have a big impact, but we've got to get our own house in order. But we actually have a lot of clubs we work with who are still trying to figure out, well, what do we mean by house in order? What are those resources? And you're talking to all sorts of great people around, helping those organizations do it. But we start with the fans, and it is having an impact on the football club as an entity itself. So lots of amazing things we've learned. I could spend the whole hour just talking to you.
You could, but I think we can segue there into quite an interesting point around football clubs, or all sports organizations doing their own work, and how you're finding the fan engagement side, how far you're finding that being prioritized alongside perhaps other sustainability issues. Because from an organizational perspective, I know from all of our work with football clubs, yes, but also with sports more generally, they're always a bit reticent to kind of go out too hard on campaigns or communicate too far if they don't feel as though they've got that credibility themselves. And I guess fan engagement, we're seeing a lot more of it now, a lot more external sharing of work and a lot more engaging with fans around these efforts. But this, I guess, feeds in a little bit to the second point around possible challenges maybe in the area that you've found so far, or what your insights are around, you're working, as you said, with clubs, but also with CCOs, etc., and how the sense you're getting around the fan engagement prioritization in terms of time, resource, investment, etc., compared to perhaps other areas of operational sustainability or sustainability management inside the organisation, etc. Have you got a feel for that?
Yeah, absolutely, and there are an awful lot of wonderful people working behind the scenes who are incredibly passionate about the things that you and I are passionate about. Some of them have a lot of agency, and their club have said, "Go for it. We trust you," and they've resourced it up accordingly. And some, don't have the same. There is, any brand, like whether you're a football club or whether you're a Unilever or any organisation, greenwashing is a serious thing. It's the last 20, 30 years of organisations making commitments, but actually, well, what about this? What about that? We are, and particularly football clubs know the power of the media. And if you're a player, this is another fascinating area. You easily connect the dots with a player coming out and suggesting that their fans do something green. Okay, well, what happens next? Well, what are you doing, player? Same with a football club. So I do think that they're getting your own house in order, or some people call them hygiene factors. Absolutely, that has to be worked on. And again, as organisations, these aren't heavy polluting. This is not a heavy polluting industry.
Comparative to others, absolutely.
Right. And so the line that we have with those clubs is, and we talked about this when we first set it up, is should we have an advisory service to help that club and roadmap for energy, water, waste, their scope 1, 2, 3 of emissions, and there are more and more organisations now popping up offering that service, and they are absolutely needed, because this is essentially an SME from a business perspective, but the brand is absolutely colossal. So the single biggest thing, if you just look at climate impact, CO2 impact, let's say, and having a some sort of scaled effect on emissions reduction. The single biggest thing any club could do would be inspire its fan base to take action. Now, when you're a football club, why do you exist? You exist to entertain. You exist because we choose to spend our free time watching our clubs and watching football as a whole. And that's what their job is. They're an entertainment brand. And so I think there's always going to be a line where a club says, it is about the players on the pitch. They are coming for that, 3 o'clock Saturday, couple of hours, and that's what we're here for. So I do think there's naturally a point where, a club will say, look, we're playing our part here. We're helping out. But I think we also know that brands, and particularly, looking at the sort of younger generation of, people growing up and their relationship with football, people really are looking to brands and entities and saying, they are kind of judging and assessing what are they doing as organizations. And that's not just from a climate perspective, that can be from an inclusion perspective, that can be from a health perspective, and they're making choices. And so one of the arguments that we're starting to look at here is, actually, if we provide a great experience for your fans, are they more loyal to your football club? Do they come to games more often? Are they commercially spending more money with you? If you're a young fan, like that Wickham family I've talked about, actually, are we helping grow your fan base, particularly with a younger audience? And so I think this has happened in the kind of, in the kind of FTSE 100 world, where this sustainability thing sat in the CSR department and was a report that was done and some great case studies of some really nice things happening. And actually now it needs to sit in the boardroom. It needs to sit with the commercial side of the business and saying, actually, we have suppliers, we have consumers, and what are we going to do to talk about them? What is our story? What is our journey? So I think football it has an awful lot of other things going on, a lot of other social issues. You've got gaming and gambling, you've got drinking, you've obviously had the race side of things, which continues to go on. So I do feel if you're a football brand, there are a lot of very important other things to juggle as well. But we are right at the beginning here. And I guess the take I have on this is, of course, keep working on get your own house in order. But we know that an inspiring campaign, something that's branded, that resonates with the mass population, really can have big impacts very, very quickly. And also the work we do with the club is, we're not asking them to run the platform. We're not asking them to develop the activities. What we're saying to the club is, direct your fans to Planet Super League, and there's a tournament with lots of other clubs taking part. So you're not going it alone. Yeah. There's 63 clubs signed up so far out of the 92 in the UK. Yeah. So take part with everyone else. And Planet Super League will do the campaigning and the heavy lifting. Yes, we want to give you assets and things, and we want you to activate it in theory on a match day and through your players and through your channels. But we are providing, I believe, a service that means that if you're a football club going, well, we'll do something on a match day and we'll have a reusable, beer cup, and we'll encourage sustainable transport. Fantastic. Absolutely do that. Yeah. Fans spend 99.9% of their time not in the stadium. Yeah. And if you're a big Premier League club, 1% of your fan base probably ever set foot in your stadium.
Yeah. And there's so much in terms of more broadly as well. I think what we see and the conversations we have are that whilst sports organisations need to do this work operationally themselves to be credible, we also haven't got time to wait for clubs to be perfect before they start engaging with their fans, their consumers, citizens, etc., on this messaging. Because as long as it's honest, as long as it's credible, as long as it's humble, and the communications are strong in that way, there's no reason why clubs can't, all sports organisations can't talk about their own journey more and have that filter down to their fans and then engage with them in these areas. The same way as they engage with them on, activations around sponsorship, etc. There's a lot of effort in that area. I'm conscious of time, and I think there's two elements. One, I think you had some really interesting stats of sort of the levels of CO2 emissions avoided compared to perhaps footprints of clubs, I think, which is a really interesting insight that we want to talk about. And then maybe we could just finish off again with any learnings that you've, through this process that you've gone through over the past 18 months. And you've said some of these brilliant learnings from a fan engagement perspective, which we'll recap, but maybe from a business perspective as well, that might be interesting. But talk to us about this sort of emissions avoided and maybe some insights on that in terms of what they actually look like compared to a club's footprint.
Yeah. I've got an example, which I've just looked at the league table as we're recording this, and it hopefully works quite nicely. So at the top of League Two are Forest Green Rovers, which is fantastic. Let's hope they get up into League One. And I think the higher they move up the football league table, the better it is for everything we're trying to do here. So Forest Green Rovers, top of League Two. 6 points behind them in second place are Northampton Town. Northampton Town we've worked with right from our first or second ever pilot. And the Northampton Town fans have had more impact than any of the other clubs added together. I did a bit of number crunching, and it's hard to find stuff out here because, it's a very new space. And we talked a few minutes ago about the scope 1, 2, and 3. And I think if we sort of draw a line at scope 3, and again, people will debate this around where from a football club does scope 3 land in terms of fans anyway, we're probably talking about the consumption of products at the stadium, what they're eating and drinking, and fan traveling to matches. Okay. So both of those are very much about a fan having a really direct engagement with the club, i.e. they're turning up on a match day. But what we know is, as much as I love Forest, I can't get to the City Ground, one, because all the tickets are sold out at the moment, but I don't have time to go. So I do think there's debates on like these scopes, and when you get into the fans, like where does it stop? we do a bit of work in that scope 3 around the match day and the club. I'd say we work a lot more in the next scope, and I don't know whether this is called scope 4. I don't know whether this is called scope X, which I've heard is a great sort of catch-all term. But we've got over 130 activities on our site: energy, food, travel, waste, etc. Now, taking those two clubs back to Forest Green and Northampton, back in season 2019-2020, this is pre-COVID, so when football fans were still attending stadiums. According to Forest Green Rovers' published carbon footprint, they were at 47 tons of CO2. Okay. And now that is probably artificially a little bit low because of the amazing work they're doing. Their electricity is from Ecotricity, so that's already at zero. So, they're a low footprint, and I know it's decreased since then, but they're at 47. That's what they published. And that's essentially their scope, I believe, 1, 2, and 3. So 47 tons. So far in Planet Super League, Northampton Town, and we can argue they're comparable clubs then next to each other in the league, stadiums about the same size. We've had about 500 fans sign up for Planet Super League who support Northampton, taken part in our tournaments. They've completed 12,000 activities of all the ones that we have, 12,000, and they're all VAR, so they're all kind of verified by us. Cumulatively, those fans have saved 66 tons of CO2. So we're still at small numbers, but we're looking at Forest Green at 47 as an organisation, and Northampton, 500 Northampton Town fans at 66. So
over a 12-month period, would you say?
Again, these is probably 3 tournaments in a year, so I think it's all sort of comparable. So my point here is, absolutely 1, 2, and 3 is really important. Get your house in order. But if you really want impact, if you really want, as a football club, as a footballing body, to turn around and say, we actually want to not just go net zero, but we want to actually have a big impact on the world reducing its emissions. The best thing to do is engage your fans. It comes at a lower cost, by the way. Northampton Town haven't yet, maybe never will, paid us a penny for us to engage their 500 fans. I'm sure organizations would like bigger budgets, but budgets are being spent on scope 1, 2, and 3, and they need to, and they should continue. But I guess one thing I'm interested in sort of getting into in the coming year is, I worry a little that we get a bit trapped into this 1, 2, and 3 focus. It's part of ESG reporting. It's very well documented. Other industries are using it. It's well known. But actually, if we want impact, we need to have a new narrative around helping fans cut emissions. So I'm not saying for a minute ignore 1, 2, and 3. But what I'm saying is the real way we're going to win here is working with fans. And I can't tell you, I'd love to say, and I've got the blueprint and this is the answer. We need to figure out what kick-ass fan engagement is. What is the Champions League like in 5 years' time? Like, what should a club really be doing? How far should it go? I don't know the answer. We get really excited working with clubs and trying things out. We need to figure this out. But that, from an impact perspective, I think I pulled those figures off last night, and what's nice about it is I can show you, or anyone who wants, I can show you the 12,000 photos of those activities.
Strap in for a couple of days.
Exactly. It's a great photo album. I'll put the slides up on it, But my point is that this is real action that has actually happened in households. And yes, we can argue whether this was incremental or going to happen anyway, but we've used it through a vehicle. Northampton, as I said earlier, they've won the Impact Award in Planet Super League, and lots of clubs have made these great gestures around planting trees and doing stuff. Well, Northampton, Planet Super League have protected 3,000 football pitches of rainforest with our partnership with the Rainforest Trust. And that's what we give as our awards out to the club that has the most impact. So I do think there's this other part of, you were talking about running a startup and an organization. We are tiny, our brand relative to, any of these brands, Crawley, Harrogate, Rochdale, Hartlepool, whatever. These smaller football clubs have been in existence for well over 100 years. We are a very small startup, and what we really want, what we're kind of learning is, what does a partnership with a football club look like? Because what clubs are used to doing in many realms are having sponsors, and more it's great to see these kind of sustainability based sponsorships. I think we saw one from Manchester City launch, particularly around water, and came out a couple of days ago, and it's fantastic. There's very much a commercial side to that sort of thing as well, and I think what we need to try and figure out in the sustainability space is, where's the value being created? Who is that value being attributed to? And how do we take something that's great at the grassroots level and at the community level, but how do we really get it into the boardroom, to the ownership, the owners of the football club? And that's the journey that we're, I guess, at the very early stages of. So for me, the big thing is lots of wonderful conversations, lots of ideation, lots of trying it out. The biggest thing that I think we're also trying to figure out is the financial viability of this. It's really fun doing a pilot. It's really fun taking one football club and trying something out with the club and their fan base for a period of time and going, there's a great case study. We did this with this club. Isn't it lovely? And you get a bit of PR and it's a good case study. The question is, how do you scale that? So how do you take it from one club and get it into all clubs? How do you get it into other sports? How do you take this Planet Super League idea and put it in Germany or put it in the US or cricket in India, for example, and turn this into a business? So we are a business. We're a huge loss-making business. Line item 1 in our articles of association is impact on the planet. That's why we exist. So James and I did not set it up to become a unicorn startup, nor I think do we want to run an organization like that. But this does need to be sustainable. And when I teach management, the first thing in sustainability or business is keeping it sustainable, i.e. keeping it running and keeping this alive. And I think that's the big thing here. Is it's great seeing little pilots and pockets of activities, but actually there does need to be a viable model here that means that things like this can grow.
Amazing. And I think just there was so much there that you covered. I think it's helpful maybe if I just see some of that as well, in terms of, first of all, with the Northampton Town comparison with Forest Green in terms of the CO2 equivalent emissions saved. That is fascinating and actually really important for our listeners to hear, because there is very little data in terms of what carbon footprints look like and what they mean. And actually, it's a big point that we're trying to change in terms of our organisation to get more reports and data out there around some of this stuff. But that, for people, if you think of just to remind of that, Forest Green's entire carbon footprint is 47 tonnes, and through fan engagement with Planet Super League, Northampton Town saved 66 tonnes. So agreed, football clubs, sports organisations can't abscond their own responsibilities and push this on fans to reduce emissions. But what they can do is, what that shows is the reach and the breadth in terms of what sports clubs can do themselves, which we all have to focus on doing. But then when they get to that stage, or when they are doing this work with organisations to reduce fan behaviour, to change fan behaviour, the massive impact it can have comparative to their own emissions. So that's really, really important, I think, just to make sure people understand the importance of those stats and what that means. And then, more broadly, I think in terms of as you mentioned, with the organisation itself, Tom, I think challenges in terms of this space that we see across our business, across other organisations, associations, councils, businesses, charities, etc. in this area. This work is crucially important, but is still working on the backs of people giving up their own time, putting in their own money, driving things that probably, for my organization, for your organization, if a bank looked at it, they wouldn't loan you money against it, put it that way. But we all dig deep, bootstrap, and do this work because it needs to be done and try and make ends meet where we can, etc. And that is the phase we're in with combating climate change and sustainability in sport. And I think that's something that needs to change, and it will change in the coming years. But I think as you're talking, the one thing that goes through my head in terms of that sustainability and that viability is that I hope sports organizations understand the great value of this while it's available to them, and it's not too early for them to get their heads around, because it's absolutely crucial that sports organizations are looking at doing this work now at the start of this journey, not in 5 or 10 years' time. So I think there's loads of learnings there in terms of that, the scale, the sustainability of organizations that are trying to support sports to do this, and actually the fact that if sport wants this help, if they want expertise outside their organization that they don't currently have inside their organizations, they actually have to support these organizations to drive that work. That's essentially what it boils down to at this stage, I think.
Very
Agree?
Well. Absolutely.
So just to finish off with, I'm conscious of time, but just to finish off with, is there any sort of learning, Tom Gribbin 2 years ago versus Tom Gribbin now? Is there any learning that you kind of think, I wish I'd have known that in advance, or I wish I could share that with people so they don't go down this road? Because you've already given us great learnings around, finding campaign moments versus an always on sort of idea. The fact that professional athletes talking about this stuff is brilliant, but actually community leaders, in your example, provide a much more direct impact to driving change, etc. So you've already given us loads of gems, Tom, in that respect. But is there anything you wish you'd known a couple of years ago, or that you could share?
It's a very good question. I think what the thing that this space needs, and I mean sustainability and engaging people, whether we're doing fan engagement through sport or just a brand engaging its consumers, I'm still looking for, and I'm starting to work with some people that have really come from the cutting edge of putting out new campaigns, initiatives, startups. So what we need is we need the world's most incredible talent working in this space, and you've seen that, right, in football, where as the money's come into the Premier League over the years, essentially the best players in the world now play for the clubs in this country, which is why the product, the Premier League, is probably the biggest sporting brand in the world, because it has the best talent in. And if all that talent went to another market, then people wouldn't watch the Premier League. And like you say, people like you and I, Claire, and our counterparts, we've got a great community. We actually need this dearth of graduates coming out with amazing computer science degrees or creativity. We need to think about the emerging technologies and ways that brands are inspiring people and changing lives, and we need to bring that talent in. And so that's the thing that I'm really, James and I have got great complementary skills. Our Venn diagram kind of, we overlap probably a little bit too much. And so for me, you need a really well-rounded team in terms of skill set, but I think it's this kick-ass talent that we need as an industry. We need to excite. I do a lot of teaching at UCL and in the master's degree and the undergrad degree, and I talk about this stuff, and it's great. And actually we need these graduates from any university who are really passionate and really driven, and we need to get them into this space. And we need to be offering internships and opportunities, and the clubs do as well, because it's going to take, I think, because the bar's so high with engaging fans or people, your app has to be slick and it has to be amazing. Ours isn't yet, and we need the funding to do that. But we need the imagination as well. And that for me is, I think that's how I also see that as a positive thing. I think through imagination and creativity and some patience and some diplomacy. But I think if you put exciting things on the table with the footballing stakeholders and the clubs, even players, they will get behind it. They will get excited. One of the highlights for me so far was getting on the BBC One show, which is for those who don't really watch it, is a big is a sort of a big program on the BBC do, which is around kind of current affairs and entertainment. And we had a segment with Cambridge United as the winners of that. And what it did is it took a lovely sustainability tournament with football clubs and it put it into sort of prime time television, just for a few minutes.
Yeah.
But we need to get it out of the news and the stakeholder magazines, and that's where it needs to sit. And what is my TikTok strategy? I have no idea. If there's anyone here who wants to help figure out how we bring content online, but that's where this gets exciting, because if you're a football club, you'll also be going, what's our TikTok strategy? And we don't have a TikTok strategy, and I wish we did. So I think I probably dodged your question a little bit, but I think I wish, and I'm always thinking like how do we get some amazing talent to give up probably better paid and give up more secure roles, but actually this space is it's still a blank piece of paper.
Help drive it. Be the change.
Absolutely.
There's the advice. Well, listen, Tom, it's been such a pleasure to chat to you. Thank you for coming on the podcast today. It's been wonderful to have you here and get those insights around fan engagement, and also being a startup in this space as well. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks. That was Tom Gribbin, co-founder of Planet Super League, on the Climate of Sport podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Climate of Sport podcast. Please like and subscribe, and get in touch if you want to share information about the work that you're doing, if you want to appear as a guest, or you want to recommend guests, or you just have ideas of conversations you'd like us to have. You can get in touch by emailing info@sportpositivesummit.com.